This is Open to Hope Radio, featuring Dr. Gloria Horsley and her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley, coming to you on behalf of the Open to Hope Foundation, dedicated to those who are looking for hope after loss.
Welcome to the Open to Hope Show in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, with my mom and co-host,
Dr. Gloria Horsley.
We're going to talk to two women today, Dr. Abigail Brenner and Rita Silverman. Dr. Abigail Brenner is a board-certified psychiatrist and a fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. Rita Battat Silverman has a BS in psychology and is a life coach, talent manager, and freelance literary agent. Together, they have researched and written the best-selling book, Replacement Children, The Unconscious Script, with a foreword by Katie Couric. Welcome to the show, Abigail and Rita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The definition is very confusing, and replacement child is about, it's not about replacing a child who has died. It's really about an experience of an individual who is enmeshed in an unconscious script, which is to fill a void left by a child in the family who has died or become incapacitated in some way. It could even be after the loss of a pregnancy, because that's a very significant loss.
Could be after the death of a child, another child comes along. That could be a replacement child. It could be an older child that passes away, and a child in the family becomes a replacement child, sort of taking over, filling the shoes of that deceased child, deceased sibling. It could be an adopted child, or it could be an incapacitated child, and another child in the family sort of takes over for that particular child. So many people fit that description. And really, the difference between having a subsequent child, as we get asked this a lot, and a replacement child, is that in many instances, in most instances, a child that comes along after a death of a child or takes the place of another child is the subsequent child.
Rita, you are an example of a replacement child. Is that how the idea came about originally to do this?
Yes. What happened is I had a 14-year-old brother who had a hole in his heart, and he passed away at 14, and I was born 18 months later. And, I never really had ever heard the word replacement child. But what happened is when my son was about 5 or 6, I was talking to one of the mothers at his school who had 2 children. And the older child was treated very differently than the next child. And one day at lunch, she happened to mention that this first daughter was not her first child, that her first child was diagnosed with leukemia when she was about 8 months old. And the doctors then said, have another child. You're going to lose this one. So she immediately got pregnant. Bad advice. She immediately got pregnant and lost her little girl who had leukemia 10 days before the second child was born.
Wow.
And she wasn't equipped. She said she was a mess, that she emotionally just couldn't handle anything, that she really wanted the second child, but this wasn't the child she wanted to bring home. And she knew she wasn't connecting with it the same way, that she was just very deep in grief and felt insecure as a parent. And it was just a very different type of relationship that she had with that first child and later on the next child, which was her third. And then, it's really funny because all of a sudden I heard different stories sort of like that, and pieces of a puzzle started coming together for me. And I started to look for information on this because I had a wonderful, mother. My father died when I was quite young. But I was always being compared to my brother. My brother always made A's where I did not, where, there were I always felt I was in competition in some way with somebody who was a ghost.
Right.
It is really hard when you're compared to a deceased sibling, because I have a brother that died, and, when someone dies, they're elevated to the status of God. That's what we always say as siblings. They never do anything wrong again. And they take on a larger-than-life personality in the family.
And it's a shame because then you really don't get to know your sibling that's not there anymore. They're not real people. And I remember as a child resenting him. He could always do better than I did no matter what I did. And it's another loss for you because you really don't get to know that person as a person. I noticed that there were certain similarities when somebody was having to make up for someone else in the family. And I started talking to Abigail, and I were friends before this, and she is a wonderful author and writer. And she started to see the patterns, too, when we started talking about it. And that's how this came about. And she realized there was a very huge gap in information. Also, Abigail blogs for Psychology Today.
I started getting people's life stories. You know, some of the responses were very small. Some of them were like pages long, where they told me the whole story of what had happened to them. And for many people, they've been putting the pieces together over the years, trying to find out as much information as they possibly could on their own. Unfortunately, there wasn't too much. So there are a lot of old articles going back to the 60s, but not too much else. But a lot of people really hadn't put it together. They just knew that they were miserable. There were a lot of issues in the family, and they felt sometimes like they were alien in the family, that the way they were treated was very, very different from other siblings. And so for them to see that there was actually a term that was used to describe this syndrome, and they noticed certain of the traits and symptoms that other people had and were describing, it was a really revelatory moment for them, so to speak, very insightful. And they really felt better about it, and not saying it solved all their problems by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that they got a sense that there really was something that did describe who they are. Other people feel the same way you do. You're not odd man out.
Right. And it's on a continuum. And not everybody is the same. Some people don't even realize it until you start talking. And they go, oh, yes, I have some of these traits.
I think there's no way parents ever get over grief for the loss of a child. And a lot of people have raised that issue with me in particular. How does a parent ever get over? You shouldn't use that term, unresolved parental grief. What does that mean? Well, it really means that, you know, in most normal cases, people may grieve their child forever, but they go on with life eventually.
Yeah.
They find a new norm after a death, and they go on with life.
Well, that's the definition. That the parents are caught up in a grief where they can't get on and move forward with their life.
They cannot get on, and they cannot get over the loss of that child. So they're looking to find someone to replace that particular child.
The loss of a pregnancy is a very significant loss. And unfortunately, a lot of women don't have the correct support for it. People say, oh, you have another child, or, you know, you can get pregnant. And they don't realize the baby is real to the mother the minute that she's conceived.
What are some of the signals that you were replacing?
And some of the things that parents shouldn't do, and the do's and don'ts kind of thing. I'm curious from a personal standpoint too.
Well, the thing that, like Heidi was saying, that I was compared all the time. You know, your brother would have done this differently. He would have brought home A's. You know, he would not talk back to me. You know, it's just you don't stand up straight. He always had good posture. You know, the craziest little things like that. So you always feel like you are being compared. And my mother was wonderful. I mean, it wasn't like I was abused in any way, but she could not get over this. You know, it was a very difficult thing. And at that time, in the 40s and the 50s, there wasn't any help. There weren't therapists. There weren't groups. So, you know, you're struggling alone. And that's, you know, was my experience. A lot of times, you know, like we have a chapter of famous replacement children.
Yes, I saw that.
And like Elvis Presley, you know, he was born with a dead twin. And his mother said he was always trying to make up for that lost twin. And I think that in the Twinless Twin Society, when I've spoken to people in the Twinless Twin Society, even if someone doesn't know their twin, lots of times they almost feel like they have an obligation. They have a feeling of guilt. Then they survived and their brother or sister did not, and are trying to make it up to the parents. This is very subconscious. This isn't a conscious thought. The first thing is to understand it and to understand what's happening. Each case is different. And I think that if you, first of all, you know, replacement is denial that something didn't happen or that this other person is not their own person in their own right. They have to really understand what's happening, because the parents are victims in this too. This isn't like the parents.
Yes.
There's no bad guy, good guy.
Right.
You know, it's like everybody gets sucked into this. And there's a fuller understanding and a fuller relationship once you understand this. And the parents, if somebody is treating someone like a replacement child, they need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they may have grief work that they need to see a therapist and take care of so they feel more comfortable. And
Right.
then, you know, talk to the child, find out what's going on.
Things can be done to change the situation. And parents need to, we do have some stories from parents who are very aware, looking at stories like that, what parents did do that was right for their child to make them feel unique and special.
Well, that's
is
what
very,
I'm thinking,
very
Abigail.
important.
When you're saying unique and special, sure, they just say to them, you know, I love how you're your own person. I love how
Absolutely.
you're different than your other siblings or than the siblings that died. You all have your strengths, and that's a great thing. And this is, Rita, you had a strong personality, and, you know, you're opinionated, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a positive trait.
Right, right. But I think you're right. You need to separate it out.
Right.
And that's really important. And, you know, we have in the book that it's not all negative. A lot of times, the strengths that are developed because you have to really serve you well later on. So a lot of our stories are from people that are incredibly successful.
And I wondered, Katie Couric wrote the foreword. Is she a replacement child?
She's not a replacement child,
No.
but she did a lot with grief. She worked even with Sesame Street. She wanted her children to understand. Katie lost her husband when he was very young, in his 40s, and her children were very little.
And then she lost her sister also
Right.
shortly after that. So she's very, very schooled in grief, very personally, and she did a lot of work helping her daughters, who were very young at the time, like 2 and 6.
We have a chapter on the forgotten mourners. And lots
Right.
of times if a child passes away when another child is already present, the parents are given a lot of attention, but the children are sort of forgotten about.
Right. Heidi and Gloria, can I just comment on one thing that I think is very important?
Yes.
I've gotten a lot of comments and people who write blogs and do a lot of talking to the community of women who have lost children in pregnancies and have lost babies afterwards. For some reason, in recent literature, maybe because there was a very famous person who lost a child and went on to have another child, this term replacement somehow found its way into their literature. And there's a lot of resentment and a lot of criticism about it. And I should say that having another child does not make a replacement child. That's a subsequent child. Okay, the experience of a replacement child is something that happens later on in terms of how the parent treats the child. So they should not even be considering that term whatsoever.
Thank you,
Thank
Abigail
you.
and Rita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your listening to this show today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and visit us at opentohope.com, and God bless.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Doctors Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time, when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.